Hey everyone, welcome to another lesson. So in this one, I want to introduce you to functions with outputs. Now, so far, we've talked about functions, or a few kind of flavors of different functions in the past couple of sections, right? So we've talked about simple functions, we've talked about, functions as parameters, and the final type of function that you can actually work with in Python is a function with output, which is a very useful thing in Python, and something that you will see all over the place as well, which we will go over. All right. So to just kind of remind you what we've talked about when it comes to functions, I'm just going to go over some of this stuff that we have mentioned so far. So this is in front of you is a simple function, right? So if you remember, in a simple function, we define a function name and then open and close parentheses and colon, and then we have our command or whatever, and that again becomes a simple function. You can easily call it by just calling the function name itself. Very simple stuff, right? And it's going to run any command that you have down here. So that is a simple function. Now, if you remember, we talked about functions with a parameter or multiple parameters, pretty much the same concept. What we do is we define it, again, we give it a name, but this time we actually put a variable or something inside that parenthesis. That is essentially, the value that the user is going to be entering. So when the user calls this function, they're going to replace this, right? This, name, for example, in this case, with whatever they want, and this is going to be replaced within the function code itself. So that is a function with a parameter, or as they call it, a function with an input. So, but there's one type of function we haven't talked about, but interestingly enough, we've actually used it. So, that is a function with an output. So the idea with a function with an output is that you do the same thing, define a function and run some sort of a command, but in this case you use a keyword called return and you return something. Okay, now I want you to understand why there's a thing called function with an output, because it can get really confusing why functions with outputs exist. But the idea with a function with an output is that you can use the value that the function spits out, whatever the information that spits out, you can use it in a variable. Because if you think about it, with these functions that we've talked about, simple functions with parameters, you could add a value inside it and it's going to do something with it, right? But it's actually not going to let you use it as a parameter by itself. Now let me actually take you to code real quick and let me show it to you. So again, this is how it works. When you have a function with an output, you can literally use this function by itself as a parameter, as a variable in some other part of your code. So let me explain it with an example. So, let's define a simple function here. So I'm just going to define, for example, add something, All right. Sorry about that, my keyboard is not in front of me. So there you go. So we got first, so I'm just going to add two parameters to this. All right, first and second, right? So this is our function, and I'm going to say answer equals first plus second. Great. All right, so now I'm going to say print answer. Now, if I actually go ahead and run this function, or call it essentially, right? This is what we usually do. For example, we're going to say add something. And I'm going to say, for example, 10 for the first value and 20 for the second value, right? So we should get 30. Very simple stuff, right? So we're going to get 30. Perfect. So we got a 30. Now, let me ask you something. What if we want to use this function as a variable? What if I want to, for example, take the value that was generated here and use it in some part of my code as a variable by itself? So what I would do, for example, is that let's actually just add it. I'm just going to say new variable equals add something. So if I do this, if I run this right now, it's pretty simple, right? It should make sense. For example, we say we got a variable and this is going to be that, and then later on, let's say in my code, I'm going to say new variable, or let's say, for example, new code. This is another variable, right? So we're going to say new variable plus 20. So I want to get, 30 plus 20, I should get 50, right? So if I actually print this right now, if I print new code, I should get 50, right? Let's think about it real quick. Again, we got a function here that adds two numbers, very simple, and it prints the value of that. It prints 30. So now I want to use this value that was generated by the function in a new variable by itself. So I say new variable equals add something. Again, this is our function, and I'm gonna take this variable, and add it to another number later on. Let's say throughout our code. All right. So now, again, we got 30 here, right? And then we got 20. So this should technically give us a 50. So we get a print first that's going to say 30, right? So again, 10 and 20. And then we got to get another print and another, output that is going to say 50. So again, 30 plus 20. So let's see if this works. So if I run this, as you see, we get an error. So the first one works because, again, the first one, the function checks out, right? We got, first and second number, 10, 20, 30. Perfect. But the second one actually doesn't work. And guess why that doesn't work? Because this is not a function with an output. And you cannot take the value you generated from this function to use it somewhere else, like I wanted to do here, right? And think about it. How would you actually do it? And this is when the actual functions with outputs come in. Because what you can do is you can actually return a value. You can tell it, if you actually go back here, you can actually tell it to return this thing as a value. So if I say return answer, what is going to happen is that this function is now going to put out whatever we generated here as an answer. So now this is going to work. If I run this again, there you go, we get a 50. And again, we didn't print the value here because we want to get rid of that. But now it works. Now what happened was that the value that we generated here is actually a value that can be used as data somewhere else in your code. And what is really interesting about functions with outputs is that we have actually used them in the past. And a perfect, very simple example of it is the length function. So if I take this, let me just get rid of this. There you go. Let's put it right here, and there you go. Get rid of it. So if you remember the length function, what we do is that we put something here, right? For example, hello. So this is going to give us the value or how many letters are inside this, string as an output. See, this is a function that has an output, meaning that it puts something out. So if I say, length, there you go. Now this is an actual, because this function puts the length of this string as an output, we can use it as a variable. And this is something we've used all over the place, right? So again, if I print this length, if I print this, we're going to get 5. See, the only reason we're able to actually print this is because this function is a function with an output, meaning that it puts out, it has a return value. It means that it puts out that number. So that's what a function with an output is. And if you think about it, as I said, if you don't have a function with an output, you cannot use the data that you get from that function by itself as a new variable, as a new data around your code. That's where you see functions with outputs everywhere in almost any Python code. So that is the concept of functions with outputs. Now, in the next lesson, I'm going to go over in more details when it comes to stuff that you got to know about functions with outputs. We're going to go over some more examples because I want to make sure that you understand this. But so far, just remember, a function with an output is a function that puts out a value that can be used as a variable somewhere else in your code. Because other functions we talked about, the simple functions, functions with parameters that don't have an output or return value in a sense, they don't actually do that. You cannot use their value as a variable. So that's the difference between a function with an output. So guys, let me know if you have any questions about this. I'm gonna leave a link in the resource section for you to download the PDF file to this, the function with an output, the guide to it. But we're going to continue talking about this in next lesson as well. So let me know if you have any questions. Make sure to download the PDF for yourself. I'll see you in the next lesson.